So hello everyone. Today I'm going to be in conversation with Kari Jegerstedt, who's in Norway. So about her virtual exchange. Before we get stuck in, Kari, please introduce yourself to our audience. Tell us where you are and what your subjects is, your specialty.
Well, yes, thank you. I'd love to. My name is Kari Jegerstedt, as you said, and I'm currently the head of the Center for Women's and Gender Research at the University of Bergen. I've been so for the last 4 years, but I've been working here for, for a longer time than that, so I'm just kind of like currently acting as the head. My background is in literary studies, actually, and I have a PhD on the work of Angela Carter, the British feminist science fiction fabulation writer. But since then, I've been working a lot with other literatures in English, mainly South African. I've also been working a lot with post-humanism, with queer theory, and with psychoanalysis. So they are my kind of like main research interests. And then I teach, of course, gender theory here. We have a bachelor's program in gender studies. We have a year program in gender studies. We're hoping to get a master's program. We don't have that yet, but we have a PhD program. So we just lack the middle kind of like part. So yeah.
Thank you, Kari, for that. You mentioned queer theory, which is what we're going to focus on today, Kari, because I've already spoken to John Brady in Florida about his virtual exchange in queer theory. So I was wondering how you heard about this and why did you want to participate in a virtual exchange on queer theory?
I actually heard about it only because John Brady was looking for someone to collaborate with in Norway. And that's because the Norwegian Directorate of Higher Education, they had this call. They wanted to institute the COIL virtual exchange model, also at Norwegian universities. It hasn't been used here before. So they had a call through the Panorama initiative that you could get like extensive courses in doing this virtual exchange. I never heard about it. John that had done it before, he saw this as an opportunity to connect with some new people. So he was looking for someone in Norway, and it eventually just landed on my desk, like being sent around. And I thought, like, my God, this is fabulous. This is really, really an opportunity. Of course, also he contacted me from Florida, and we knew about the situation in Florida at that time. We thought it would also be important to engage with this as an act of international solidarity. Can I say
Sorry,
that?
just to step. You said you were aware of the situation. Are you referring to how the
Oh,
clampdown and the
yes, with the House Bill
restrictions?
999 and all the animosity against kind of like teaching critical theory, queer theory,
Mm,
everything that had to do with gender and racial issues. Uh,
sure.
and of course, that's also been something that we've been discussing a lot here in Norway with the new kind of like anti-woke and a lot of like these discussions. So I thought it would be an excellent topic to engage with internationally, also for our students to kind of like meet other students that would be working under different circumstances and kind of exchange ideas and stuff like that. So that was the main point, but I also looked at John Brady's previous courses in teaching queer theory, and I thought they looked so interesting, and I really liked how he was doing both the curriculum, but also the way of teaching, how they were assessing it through that had this queer carnival kind of concept at that
Yes,
time
yes, he
that
talked
I
about
thought
that.
I could play around with, and then of course I looked at his research interests, and they went, oh, but these are my research, and you're
Perfect,
also
perfect
interested in
match.
psychoanalysis and queer theory and stuff like that. So it was a perfect fit in a way. So I sent them an email back and said, yes, I'm willing to talk to you. And then we met over Zoom, and we instantly kind of thought this would be a good idea. Yeah.
Fantastic. Can I just ask as an aside, was this your first experience of a virtual exchange, or have you experienced virtual exchange before?
I never heard of virtual exchange
Wow.
before.
So, yeah,
I had
you
no
really
idea
dived in
what
the
it
deep
was.
end there, didn't
Yeah.
you?
And by the time John got in, we got in contact, it was only like a week before the deadline for the application
Wow. So,
was out. So, but of course, John had done a lot of like preliminary work, but we had to do really quick work here to kind of like be part of them of the
right.
application. And then only a couple of weeks after we submitted it, we learned that we got it. And then we started this really intensive coursework with the AAC&U that the Norwegian Director of Higher Education had hired to give us courses. And I had to get an admin person on
Of
board.
course, it's a lot of
Yeah.
extra
Yeah,
work
so
doing
it's a
virtual.
very, very intensive coursework. But then I also was happy that the University of Florida invited me to come to a conference they had that was also partly about virtual exchange. So I was able to go to Florida and meet the people there. And that's when I met John in person for the
Right.
first time. And yeah, so that
It
was.
always helps, doesn't it? I mean, virtual exchange is fantastic, but it doesn't replace the meeting the
It
people
does
in
not
person.
replace the meaning. And that was something that we discussed a lot, like when
Yeah.
we designed the course too, because I mean, we were designing a course for students that would only meet digitally. And we knew how important it had been for us to also be meeting in person.
Mm.
How do we actually
So is
bring?
that something that might happen in the future? Your students might go there and John's students might come to Norway? Because
I,
I mean, often virtual exchange is used as a preparation for an actual physical mobility, and I'm wondering, might you do that in the future?
yes, yes, it is. But I have been trying to secure some more funding for this collaboration, but I haven't been successful so far. And the point then was that some of the students should meet and then kind of like work together to make this course even better and get to know each other. And also by the thinking that we would go to, because we also want to broaden it with Brasilia.
Yeah.
Yes, that John had worked with before, so that we would go to workshops both in Brasilia, in Florida, and here. Also to look at the facilities, how the universities look like, because it also gives you the kind of like feel of what kind of environment that you're in, which makes it easier to plan a course, I think, very much so.
Yes, John was expressing when I spoke to him last week, he said his students were concerned about their safety
Mm.
during virtual exchange. And you're talking about the physical appearance of the university. And he mentioned this big glass window overlooking the campus or whatever, and that the students felt exposed. I'm wondering what your and he also mentioned that the Brazilian students kept their cameras off. They were very, very afraid for their safety. I'm wondering what the Norwegian students
Mm,
experienced.
mm. Well, they were not afraid for their safety at all. I mean, we do have a different climate here, although there has been some incidents. But at the Pride event then in Oslo the same year, there was a shooting, a terrorist attack, killing 2 people, injuring more people. And after that, there was a lot of police everywhere to kind of protect us when we did stuff for the anniversary. So we had this like why queer history matters big conference, international conference here in Bergen that the center also took part in, where we kind of like had to have police protection everywhere to make sure that so the terror alert was kind of like heightened during
Right.
that time. But the students never kind of they never felt uncertain. And I think also because a lot of the students that I had in the course didn't feel like personally threatened, because a lot of in Norway too, I mean, with the heated debate and all that's going on social media, a lot of trans people, for example, but also other queer people, they meet a lot of harassment. But my students hadn't been there, so they didn't feel that unsafety. But we did talk about the opportunity of going to Florida to kind of visit. And then several students said that no, they wouldn't like that, because
Right.
then they would be worried about their
Sure.
safety
Sure.
as well.
So, Kari, getting down to the nitty gritty, when the students presumably were working in teams with each other with a student from Florida University, what are some of the experiences and ideas that stick with you that they talked about and exchanged with each other? How was that experience from what you were seeing from the outside?
I think for my students, this really strong experience of someone being in a very precarious situation that were similar to themselves, but then they got all this kind of like, oh my God, is this really going on, and stuff like that. So it was a very much kind of like personal experience of differences. But of course, it was also a very personal experiences of academic differences, which
Oh,
is, yes, which is
you
a
mean
different
by
kind of
that? In what
issue.
way?
Yeah, and that doesn't have so much to do with the political content of the course. I mean, it's not like a political content; it's a political context of the course, because I mean, we're teaching theory, not. But of course, John's students are communications students. My students are gender students, so
Right.
they would know a lot more of the theory beforehand that the American students didn't know. So for the American students, it would be more like an introduction to queer theory, which my students have already gotten through other introductory courses, but it haven't had the opportunity to delve into depth using a whole semester only on queer theory. Queer theory is incorporated as one kind of strand of theory within gender theory, but here they had like a whole semester to do in that. They were really happy to be able to work with one theory over a longer stretch of time to kind of like see more. But on the other hand, they felt that they needed more discussion of the texts and not so much like personal things, like because the course was meant that we had to make like connections to our own life, the personal experience, people you know, and they kind of like fell out of that pretty quickly. They wanted to delve into the text and kind of like close readings and stuff like that. So I think we have to design the course more as an interdisciplinary course. Of course, the American students are really good at communications, so they knew all this. I don't know, did John talk about this as well? That we adopted this queer archive model?
He said that a part of the assessment
Mm.
was about creating something together that could go, because Bergen contains the queer archives of Europe, and the students love the idea of their work being preserved in archives. So he spoke a bit about that. Yes.
Yeah, because we have the National Queer Archive is located here at the University of Bergen. So we also kind of started to collaborate with them about like making these objects for that could be in an imaginary queer archive. So we were trying to set up like a digital queer archive where we can put all these things together.
And this is the beauty of virtual exchange, that your students were already had the theory, and John's students are more communication students. So there's a requirement to make it more interdisciplinary. And in fact, virtual exchange is growing, and the interdisciplinary aspect is becoming more common. People are sort of, academics are kind of used to look more for, oh, the language teachers and we must have all the same discipline, but now that's changing. I'm seeing when I talk to people, and I love the idea. I mean, it's very much peer-to-peer learning, so the students learning, so the American students may be learning more theory from your students, and your students learning more about communication. So I'm wondering, I mean, I see your passion and enthusiasm, so I presume you're going to do this again. So how will you adapt the content of your virtual exchange to achieve, to iron out these kind of difficulties? Of course, everyone comes across when they start doing virtual exchanges. It's all a bit of an experiment, but then it evolves, doesn't it?
Yes, yes, it does. And I think that my students didn't have a clue about all the different platforms and different tools that you could use to make stuff, and they kind of like, but with American students that was really kind of like easy. Oh, we'll just go into there, and my students are like, what's that? And they learned so much doing that. Whereas my students, I think, are stronger in the theoretical field, but they never got to kind of show that in a certain sense. So I would think that if we kind of highlight these differences instead of trying to level over them, that we can use both student groups more creatively in kind of, talking about theory, but also talking about how do we communicate theory? How do we make these issues relevant for more people than ourselves? But of course, the working with the object for the queer archive, that was the high point of the course, where they could work together and do that. But they started with that kind of late in the course because they were supposed then to be put into group and make contact and do that on their own. And it took a long time for them to kind of like get started with that. So I think to design it in a way that we get to start on that kind of group work earlier and have these kind of like discussions earlier about how we can bridge these communication theory kind of aspects from two different viewpoints. But they made amazing work. And one thing that was really interesting, they made, for example, a podcast where they looked at the shooting in Norway that had been at the Pride, and then the similar shooting at the bar in Florida, and then did the investigation about like how did the community respond to this, what were their kind of solutions afterwards. And doing that work, they really highlighted a lot of cultural differences that they couldn't. So that was really independent research that was working out from that. And then they made like other really fabulous stuff too. So in the end, it turned out very well, but that was a kind of like problem to get them started doing that in a collaborative way.
So when you redesign it, when you amend and tweak the design, do you think that you'll set aside some time at the beginning for getting to know you? Because this is a really, I mean, collaborating online anyway, it's more difficult, but you do have to create some kind of relationship and trust, don't you? Especially with a topic such as this, because if they're going to work together, they need to know each other, they need to trust each other. And I think some tutors underestimate and don't make time. They get into they sort of put loads of content in the course, and actually the students, the feedback at the end is, oh, I wish we'd had more time just to have a chat and get to know each other. I'm wondering where you stand on that.
Well, we were actually quite aware of that problem, having done all these different courses with AAC and U. So we had designed the course to have like lots of icebreaker activities all the way through, actually, until like people discussed every week and got into to talk. But I think we need to redesign those icebreakers. First of all, we made it it was important for us that everyone should know everyone, so that we mixed up the groups every week. And then you were assigned a group quite late, and I think maybe that was not a very good idea, that they should be in a smaller group from the beginning, so they could work together from the beginning, but not instead of like knowing everybody. And I know, so I have kind of like discussed this with other people doing virtual exchanges, and no, it's not a good idea. It's much better to kind of to have them know as many people as possible. But I think we want to try that out. I think me and John kind of like agrees on that. And that was one of the students' feedbacks too, that they would like to do that. And of course, there was also a difference in numbers, which was not very good, because there was a lot more American students than Norwegian students. That has also to do with a lot of administrative things, because here it takes a long time to get courses registered, and we had such a short timeline when we got the funding until we had to give the course, that it wasn't we had no chance to kind of promoted in a good enough way. So I hope to get a lot more students this next time going, so we can have more even groups. And then of course that was really interesting, because personality wise, Norwegian students and American students are very, very different. American students talk a lot, they're very social, they're very kind of like, but Norwegian students are shy and quiet.
Yes, John mentioned that the Americans talked a lot, but he also said they managed to kind of check themselves before. They learned, I mean, his last words were they became better intercultural communicators. So that's what he noticed.
Yeah, but it was so fun, because my students also, we have to get better at this. We have to learn to be more like the Americans. And we
Well,
had
you're learning from each other then. That's
yeah, and they had so many talks about this, and kind of like, and supporting each other and cheering each other on, and kind of like, yes, we are going to be more outspoken, we are going to kind of engage more, but of course, I mean, there are limits. The language barrier, of course, is one too, but most Norwegians are pretty good at the English.
pretty
So
good at it.
but it's still not their first language, so you don't speak in that language as easily. And of course, when we also had this, one thing was to talk with each other in groups, but then we also had, because we had lectures first and then kind of Q&A sessions with the whole group, and there was never, ever a Norwegian student who said anything in this kind of plenary discussion. Never. But they had
You've noted that now, so next time.
yeah, try to kind of like no, but in their groups, they worked a lot on kind of like being more assertive in the groups.
So, Kari, John mentioned in our talk that he felt it was very American centered, and the readings and the voices, and when he repeats the virtual exchange, he wants more Brazilian voices, more Norwegian voices. So we talked about the importance of decolonizing the curriculum. And Kari, what are your thoughts on that?
That was my impression too, that this was very American. And some of our students also said that sometimes they felt that they were taking a course in American pop culture, because all the examples were from American culture and stuff like that. But what was really interesting about that is that we also became a lot more aware of the differences, thinking about queer theory from the Norwegian stance. So we did a lot of research on our own to try to find, okay, but what does queer, because the word isn't even the same.
Yes,
Like,
exactly. I'm wondering about the translation and
the
the
translation
meaning.
it's completely, we use shave theory, which is like bended theory or crooked theory. It has completely different history, has completely different kind of associations that we make to the word. And so we started to do a lot of research and find out what was written about that history here in Norway. So we did a lot of that stuff. I also gave them extra readings in Norwegian that would be an introduction to queer theory from a Nordic standpoint, that would tell the same story as the American ones that we were reading, but then added on to kind of like in the Nordic countries, so and so, and have different names. And I think to kind of bring that also back to the American students would be super good. But it's also this question of translation, because things doesn't mean the same thing. We don't have two different words for sex and gender, for example.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so so I kind of like made a slide for that, also showing to the
Well,
Americans.
that's quite significant, isn't it?
Yeah,
It's
it
a
is
whole
very,
other discourse.
it's a whole other discourse. And then of course we do a lot of translations. So we would talk about, because we have just one word, kjønn, we would talk about biological kjønn, cultural kjønn, and do all these translations, but that is based on a different kind of trajectory. So when we look at how the Norwegian word kjønn is used, it's really kind of, yeah, it's very strange, because you can't really translate it in the same way. So you can't translate sex and gender, you can't translate queer. They're all different words and different histories. And I think that would broaden the course a lot. And that also has to do with interdisciplinarity, because when we now start to work with Brasilia, Lily Martinez, who's a professor there, she is a professor in translation studies.
Ah.
Yeah. So I thought that would be brilliant, because it's not only like 3 different geopolitical scenes and stuff like that, but and 3 different languages, but it's 3 different kind of interdisciplinary things that we can kind of like, you have the gender theory, you have the communications, and you have the translation, and to make the most out of that connection, I think would be super good, and look at how the different that the language is different kind of actually plays out in a lot of different ways.